Watch this video to see how I designed and created a toy train diorama for my grandson's birthday. I found an appropriate tray about 15 inches by 24 inches and a small toy train at a local discount store. The green foam blocks and white foam board were purchased at a local box store. Deciding the radius of the track to use was very important and took some time. After figuring out the radius the small train could travel around, I applied the pattern to the green florist block. I wanted a lower elevation inner circle and a larger circle elevated above a waterfall. Then began the mess of carving out the space for the white foam board track. I checked and double-checked the track layout and the junction connection before I began to apply plaster cloth to the green foam. Something to note here, I used plaster cloth over any areas on the green foam I wanted to glue together. I learned the hard way that I couldn't directly glue the green foam blocks together without the plaster cloth foundation between them. It was challenging to figure out the width of the little train wheels and the chassis height so the little train would run smoothly around the white foam board track. I have always enjoyed crafts and the art of making something by hand. The little bridge was fun to design. I wanted it to blend seamlessly underneath the white foam board track and over the little waterfall. As you can see, my workshop was on the dining room table. Also, I kept the sweeper nearby to quickly clean up all the messes I made. When possible, I love to reuse interesting items and incorporate them into my crafts. I needed some supports for the big bridge I was designing and decided to plaster some wine corks to use as the supports. They were all the same size, and as you will see later, the corks worked quite nicely. I made a drying rack by pushing pins through some of the leftover white foam board. Liquid Nails brand adhesive was used throughout this project. I used it to glue the pre-plastered green foam blocks together, and I used it to glue the track to the layout. The design for the tunnel came from a discarded salt container. It was the right size and shape, and the little train had plenty of room to go through it. Here you can see how the train layout was starting to make sense. The lower circle rack, the elevated track, the junction between them, the two bridges, and the tunnel with the mountain on top. I used acrylic paints to paint the diorama. There were many colors available locally, and they were relatively inexpensive. I spent a lot of time mixing the various colors and painting the plaster. I couldn't wait to see how it was going to turn out. Remember, plaster first, then glue the pieces together. I dug out a coal mine to the front corner of the layout. I had already carved a gold mine inside the tunnel, which contains small pebbles painted with gold paint, which you'll see later in the video. I wanted to put a waterfall from the mountain to the creek, but it wasn't until this point that I knew exactly where I was going to place it. Then the creek needed to curve around from the waterfall to go under the little bridge. I had seen clever diorama waterfalls on Pinterest, a wonderful internet website for crafters of all skill levels, and I wanted to create one too. I wondered how I was going to support the white foam board track above the span of the big bridge opening. Again, I checked Pinterest for ideas, but came up with one of my own. I used an old Lionel train track section. It worked just fine, and it was supported at each end with the 6 corks. Take a look. I was really pleased with the layout so far. All of the exposed painted plaster, including the track, was sealed with Mod Podge. I slathered it on to protect the surfaces and to add a matte sheen to the layout. After the little bottle brush trees were painted, I used Mod Podge again to glue the green flocking to the trees. I cut the 5 little trees to different lengths to look more natural on the layout. Now it was time to figure out how to make that waterfall. Consulting Pinterest again, I decided to use the acrylic caulking you see pictured here. I spread the caulking with a toothpick on a piece of plastic from a greeting card box cover. Why? The plastic had a perfect right angle I could cut to a point, then press into the mountain. The splashes were made using a mixture of Mod Podge and plaster. I mixed them together, and when soft peaks were starting to form, I quickly applied it to the bottom of the waterfall. Again, I sealed the splashes with Mod Podge. The diorama was finally finished. It took me about 3 months to do this project you see before you. Here is a picture of the gold mine under the tunnel I said I would show you earlier. This is a close-up of the junction of the 2 little train tracks. The diorama was ready to wrap and pack up for my grandson's birthday. I thought of him every time I worked on this layout. I'm a long-distance grandma, and it was a pleasure to make this for him. Happy birthday! Love, Grandma.